The wind moved like breath across the prairie, slow, steady, and watching. It swept through brittle grass and sighed against the bones of the Bramble Ranch house, stirring a length of laundry that had long since dried. The porch creaked under its weightless passing, and in the open doorway Martha stood barefoot, holding a child's dress that had never been worn. It was the color of river cotton, soft as a thought. She pressed it to her chest, then folded it carefully, too carefully, and laid it among others in the wooden crate marked Hope. She did not weep. Not anymore. Behind her, silence stretched like rope. Judah leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed, sleeves rolled to the elbow, hat tipped back just enough to show the deep furrow between his brows. He had eyes the color of worn saddle leather, eyes that didn't demand answers. He just watched like always, like the day the doctor told them. The wind lifted again, bringing the smell of dried sage, dust, and far-off horses. Martha turned her head to it, brushing her hair from her face. "It's coming," she said quietly. Judah followed her gaze across the flat horizon. Nothing. Just heat and light. But he nodded. In the parlor, the clock ticked without apology. Martha closed the crate and slid it beneath the old bed in the left room, the one meant for lullabies and quilted promise. It had stayed empty for nearly a decade. She told people it was for guests. Nobody ever stayed. She returned to the kitchen, where breakfast sat untouched. 2 tin plates. 2 cups. One marriage stretched thin by the absence of tiny hands. Judah reached for a biscuit, broke it in half, but didn't eat. His silence wasn't cold, it was simply all he had left when words had stopped helping. They heard the sound next. A faint rhythmic thud, too light for a wagon, too uneven for a rider. Judah stood first. Martha didn't move. She stood in the stillness as the sound grew, footsteps maybe, soft and desperate. And then, a shape, small and bent, emerged from the golden line where earth kissed sky. Then another. And another. 6 in all, trailing behind a woman like shadows that didn't want to leave her. Judah stepped out onto the porch. Martha followed, holding the edge of the doorway like a handrail. The woman up front walked barefoot, her dress torn at the hem, floral print turned gray by dust. She held the hand of a boy no older than 6, while the others staggered behind her, worn and hungry and half-wild. They did not speak. Dust swirled at their feet like smoke. Martha took 1 step forward and froze. "Rosie?" The woman lifted her face. Her eyes were bloodshot and brown. Familiar. Pharaoh. "Hello, Martha," she whispered. It had been 11 years since Martha last saw her sister. 11 years since Rosie had vanished in the middle of the night with a belly full of shame and no goodbye. The family never spoke her name again. The town said she ran off with a gambler. Some said worse. She hadn't changed much. Still slight, still beautiful in that aching way that made women nervous. But there were new lines now, more shadows under her eyes. Her arms, once soft, now held muscle the way a trap holds steel. Her dress clung to her with the weight of hard living. And behind her, 6 boys stood silent, watching. "Are they?" Martha began but stopped. Rosie's mouth trembled. "Don't ask where they came from. Just, let me stay." Martha looked at the boys. None of them older than 12. All bone-thin. One clutched a wooden spoon like it was a knife. Another sucked his thumb, despite looking 9. The smallest hid behind Rosie's leg and stared at Martha like she was a ghost. Judah didn't move. Didn't ask. He opened the door. Rosie looked at him, eyes cautious. "You don't even know me." "I know Martha does," he said simply and stepped aside. Inside, the air shifted. Dust followed them in like old secrets. The boys scattered quietly, some to the far wall, one to the hearth. None of them touched the food. They stood close, glancing between Rosie and Martha like trying to read something in the lines of their silence. Judah turned to his wife. "I'll get water." He left without waiting for an answer. Martha faced Rosie alone. "I don't understand," she said. "You don't have to. They think you're their mother." "I am their mother," Rosie said, voice low. "In ways you wouldn't understand." Martha's mouth went dry. She wanted to ask more, but the words felt rude, brittle. Instead, she stepped aside and motioned toward the small parlor. Rosie looked at the empty room on the left. Still barefoot, still holding one boy's hand, she walked past it. Later, as the sky deepened into rust and the fields turned to silhouette, Judah fixed up the old stable. He didn't say it aloud, but they all knew. It was for sleeping. The house had only one bed besides theirs, and it still held the scent of lavender quilts and dreams that never got born. Martha brought out blankets, one for each boy. They took them with silent hands, looking at her like she might vanish. The one with the spoon handed her a button he'd found beneath the floorboards. She held it like it meant something. "Thank you," she whispered. The boys nodded, then settled into their corners like strays too tired to run. Rosie remained on the porch, arms crossed. Martha joined her. The horizon was glowing, one of those soft, golden sunsets the prairie used to offer when they were girls chasing grasshoppers through wild oats. Back when Rosie was the wild one and Martha the quiet dreamer. "They think you saved them," Martha said. "I didn't. I just didn't leave them." Martha turned. "Where have you been?" Rosie didn't answer. Her gaze stayed on the hills. "You can't just show up with 6 boys and expect no one to talk." "I don't care if they talk. I care if they eat." That shut Martha up. Judah returned with pails of water. The smallest boy ran to him, then stopped, unsure. Judah offered the lad a tin cup. No words. Just a gesture. The boy took it and drank deeply, water running down his chin. That night, after the boys had been settled and Rosie lay curled in a blanket in the stable with them, Martha walked into the room on the left. She stared at the crate beneath the bed. She did not pull it out. She sat instead, listening to the sounds of unfamiliar breath in the yard. The wind had calmed. The prairie, it seemed, had accepted them, at least for now. In the morning the town would see. The whispers would start again. Maybe they never stopped. But for now, in the hush before dawn, there was only this. A tired woman in an old room, and outside, a sister who had once been cast out, now returned, carrying 6 names no one had spoken, and a silence even heavier. Then came a sound from the porch. A knock. Not loud. Not impatient. A single knock like a question. Martha rose slowly. Judah was already moving from the kitchen. They both opened the door. No one was there. But in the dust on the step, a rider's boot print. Fresh. And behind them, the 6 boys stirred in their sleep. The town noticed the boys before they noticed Rosie. 6 shadows darting through alleyways behind the general store, wild and shoeless, whispering to one another in code only siblings could understand. They moved like a tribe, eyes alert, always within reach of the woman who never quite met anyone's gaze. Tilly Ash was the first to speak it aloud. "Those brambles taken in strays now?" she muttered as she stacked jars of preserves. "Looks like a whole orphanage marched in and set up camp under Judah's porch." Doc Abner chuckled without looking up from his paper. "Don't reckon they're strays. They call her Ma." That word floated through town like smoke. Ma. Not Mississippi. Not Rosie. Ma. And yet not one of the 6 boys looked like the other. One was pale and red-haired, another dark-eyed with the high cheekbones of the southern tribes. 2 were twins, though clearly not by blood, just bonded by something stronger. The oldest had a split tooth and never smiled. The youngest clung to Rosie's skirts like a second shadow. On the Bramble Ranch, mornings began before light. Rosie was always up first, sweeping the porch or stoking the stove before Martha even stirred. She moved with the stillness of someone who had learned how not to wake a man. The boys, once feral with hunger, began forming a rhythm, chopping kindling, filling water buckets, rubbing down Judah's horses without being asked. Martha watched them from the kitchen window, fingers wrapped around a chipped teacup. Her silence wasn't suspicion anymore. It was wonder. And a soft ache she couldn't quite place. Rosie never explained. She didn't offer names, only gestures. When one of the boys tripped and scraped his knee, she didn't scold. She kissed the cut and tied it with a strip of old petticoat. When another boy stole an egg from the pantry, she didn't punish. She made him clean the chicken coop twice over, but afterward sat beside him and peeled an apple for them both. "They listen to you," Martha said one morning, folding sheets beside her. Rosie shrugged. "They've learned how. They call you Ma." Someone had to be. Judah didn't speak of it much. But every evening, after the ranch work slowed and the boys settled into their corners, he'd leave a tin of jerky near the stable. Come morning it was gone. No thanks spoken. None expected. At church the following Sunday, Martha arrived alone. Rosie stayed behind, claiming the boys needed washing. The truth hung unspoken. They didn't want the stares. Martha sat in the 4th pew. Alone again. Afterward, on the church steps, the whispers began like creaking wood. "I heard she's Martha's sister. Ran off years ago. Came back with 6 like she's some kind of saint. Did you see the redhead? That one ain't hers. I'd bet my land on it. She was with a traitor once. Maybe more than once. She's a burden on Judah's good name." Martha said nothing, but her cheeks burned all the way home. That evening she handed Rosie a wrapped bundle. "What's this?" She was from town. Rosie blinked. "You used your money?" "They're yours now," Martha said. "Your feet, they're bleeding." Rosie didn't cry. She pressed the shoes to her chest and walked barefoot back into the stable. The next morning she wore them. Not for herself, but for the boy who looked up at her and whispered, "You're bleeding again, Ma." She had stopped letting herself bleed years ago. But for them she would pretend she still could. Days turned hotter. The prairie cracked like old pottery and the boys grew stronger. The eldest, Elijah, helped Judah fix the split rail near the well. The smallest, whom Rosie called Cricket, followed Martha everywhere. He didn't talk much. Just hummed, soft and tuneless, as if he was waiting for someone to sing back. One afternoon, Martha was hanging clothes when the mayor's wife rode up. Her bonnet was flawless, her gloves too clean for a dirt road. "I hear your sister's taken over your home," she said with a smile so tight it could cut glass. "She's helping," Martha said. "With what?" "Raising other people's mistakes." Martha didn't answer. But the mayor's wife did not miss the way Martha folded a boy's shirt, tender, precise, almost reverent. That evening, Rosie handed Martha a bowl of stew and sat beside her for the first time. "Do you hate me?" she asked. Martha looked at her. "I don't know how to hate." "You did once. Back then." "I didn't hate you. I didn't know how to reach you." Rosie nodded. "No one did. And I didn't want them to." The air turned golden. A dust storm teased the edge of the horizon. The boys ran barefoot, chasing shadows, laughter echoing like a hymn from a church with no walls. Then came the knock again. Judah opened the door slowly. A man stood there, dusty coat, slick hair, one boot torn at the seam. Not a rider, not a settler. The kind that left more than they took and always came back for the rest. He looked past Judah. "You got a woman here with 6 boys?" Judah didn't blink. "You got a reason to be asking?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just tracking someone. No law. Just business. Name's Emery." Judah didn't offer his name. "I think she took something," Emery said. "What exactly?" "Kids." Judah's voice came low. "You want to ask her yourself?" Emery stepped back. "Not today. Just scoping." He left with the smell of rotten sugar in his wake. Inside, Rosie gripped the edge of the table hard enough to turn her knuckles white. "Do I need to leave?" she asked. Martha turned. "He's gone. But he'll come back." Judah stood behind her, arms folded. "Not if he thinks there's nothing here." Rosie looked at him like she was trying to believe it. The next day she scrubbed the stable walls until her palms blistered. That night the boys found a box outside the door, jerky, soap, matches, and a note. "You belong here. Let the fools talk. Tilly Ash." Rosie didn't ask who wrote it. She just placed it in her coat pocket and left it there. One afternoon a storm broke across the prairie. Not rain but wind, howling and relentless. The boys huddled together. Cricket cried for the first time. Martha scooped him up and carried him into the house, setting him on her lap, rocking gently. Rosie watched from the doorway, the wind tearing her hair loose. She said nothing, just stepped back out into the storm. When it passed, the world was scrubbed clean. Later, Martha found Rosie alone in the stable, brushing out her tangled hair. The shoes sat neatly by the door. On the floor beside her was a folded dress, a child's, pale blue, never worn. Rosie looked up, voice barely there. "Do you ever hate me for having them when you couldn't?" Martha knelt and took her hand. "You didn't take anything from me. You brought something back." The sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long. Inside, 6 boys whispered stories to one another, calling her Ma like it had always been that way. Outside, 2 sisters sat side by side and for the first time in years, said nothing that needed fixing. Then came the sound of hooves again. But this time they didn't pass. They stopped. And stayed. The prairie breathed in rhythms older than any man's name. Dust rose, curled, and settled again like it knew its place, like it had seen too many comings and goings to care. The wind had softened after the storm, though it left behind a silence that pressed into the eaves of the Bramble home. Inside the kitchen, Martha watched through a warped pane of glass as Rosie's boys moved about the yard with something like purpose. Not direction, not yet, but a pattern was forming. Elijah, the oldest, was lifting fence rails with Judah, his sleeves rolled and his thin frame taut with trying too hard. The twins, Peter and Jonah, had taken to sorting kindling by size. The smallest, Cricket, was drawing shapes in the dirt with a feather, lost in whatever dream children make when the world around them has been too loud for too long. Martha exhaled softly. She hadn't touched the crate under the bed in over a week. That night Rosie sat on the porch with her knees pulled up to her chest, sleeves damp from washing, hair pinned in a way that suggested she'd stopped caring whether it stayed neat. She held a chipped mug of coffee in both hands and sipped like it might hold back memory. Martha brought out 2 quilts and offered one without a word. They wrapped themselves in silence. The kind that doesn't push, only waits. I used to dream of a house full of sound, Martha said. I didn't imagine the walls would feel this small once it happened. Rosie gave the faintest smile. I thought I'd raise mine by a river. Teach them to fish. Ended up teaching them how to keep watch instead. Do they know? Rosie's face tightened. Some do. The older ones remember what it felt like before. The others just know I'm the only one who stayed. Martha turned toward the horizon, where the moon hung low and warm like a lantern lost to the sky. People think love's loud. It ain't. It's quiet. It just doesn't leave. Rosie looked at her sideways as if seeing something new. Did you know, she whispered, I named the first one after Mama's father? Martha's breath caught. You had a child before Elijah? Rosie nodded. Little girl. Didn't make it through winter. I buried her in a basin out past the Pecos. Dug the hole myself. Couldn't even cry proper. Just kept saying her name until it stopped feeling real. The wind curled around them like a hand on the back of the neck. Martha reached over, fingers trembling, and rested them on Rosie's. It was the first time she'd touched her sister since she returned. That night, Martha dreamt of soft crying and cold wooden floors. When she woke, the house was still, too still. She rose quietly and followed the faintest shuffle to the left room. The door was ajar. Inside, Rosie sat cross-legged, the crate open before her. Baby clothes spilled out like ghostly petals. I'm sorry, Rosie said, not turning. I wanted to see. Martha stood in the doorway, arms crossed against her chest. I used to sew those by lamplight. Named babies that didn't come. I named babies that never stayed. A long silence stretched between them. No accusation. Just ache. Rosie gently folded one dress back into the crate. You could still be a mother. Martha smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I don't know how to be one for someone already whole. Rosie looked up. You're already doing it? They leave flowers on your windowsill, you know. Martha blinked. They what? Elijah saw you crying once. Said you looked like a ghost wearing a dress made of hope. They started picking things, wildflowers, buttons, stones. Leave him for you when no one's looking. Martha didn't answer. Just turned and walked to the kitchen. On the windowsill, tucked behind the flour tin, was a smooth green stone shaped like a heart. Later that week, Judah took Elijah with him to the trading post. Elijah returned taller somehow. His posture had changed, not pride exactly, but purpose. He'd earned it, maybe. Judah had handed him the reins on the ride home, even let him haggle with the smith over the price of nails. That night, Elijah approached Rosie on the porch. Ma, he said, what happens if we stay here too long? She looked at him slowly. You mean if someone comes for us? He nodded. His eyes weren't scared. Just young. Hungry for truth. Then we stay together, she said. We hold the line. He nodded. Then leaned in and for the first time in years kissed her cheek. Across the yard, Martha watched from the shadows, one hand pressed to her heart like she was trying to keep something from falling out. The peace didn't last. Near the end of the week, a figure appeared at the edge of the property. Not on horseback. On foot. Thin, tall, with a slouch that reeked of lawless travel. He didn't come near the house. Just stood by the split-rail fence watching. Then vanished. The next day Judah found boot prints. Not just one. 3 sets. All circling the far field. One had a heel spur. Friends of that Emery man? Martha asked. Judah nodded grimly. Or the kind that don't ask names before loading rifles. He moved the boys into the house that night. The stable was emptied. The back window nailed shut. Rosie didn't protest. But her silence was laced with something sharper than fear. A readiness. A resolve forged from too many dawns looking over her shoulder. She stood with Judah on the porch while Martha readied the inside. I can leave, she said. You won't. If they find us. They won't. He turned toward her. For the first time he looked her in the eye without reserve. This ain't about law. It's about worth. You gave those boys something no man ever has. That makes you dangerous. Rosie's voice cracked. I didn't mean to bring trouble. You didn't, he said. It found you. We're just telling it it's not welcome. That night they kept lamps low. Rosie slept beside the boys, Martha beside her. Judah stayed on the porch, rifle across his lap. Just before dawn, Rosie whispered, I should have written. Martha, eyes open in the dark, replied, So should I. Outside the wind picked up again. The prairie stirred. Morning came with no riders. No footprints. Just an empty quiet. Judah returned to the kitchen, boots heavy with sleeplessness. He poured himself coffee, then paused. On the porch rail, tucked beneath the rocking chair, was a folded handkerchief. Inside it, a silver coin and a single word scrawled in charcoal, "Soon." Martha read it. Rosie saw it. Neither said a thing. That evening, Rosie asked Judah for a hammer and nails. "What for?" "The stable. I want to fix the beams. If we're staying, it ought to hold." He handed them over without a word. For 3 hours she worked alone. The boys watched from a distance, uncertain. Then Jonah stepped forward with a bucket of nails. Peter brought rope. By dusk, all 6 were fixing something, bracing a world they'd never been asked to build before. Martha stood in the doorway, apron streaked with flour, and saw something she hadn't let herself feel in years: belonging. Earned, not granted. She stepped down onto the porch, picked up a fallen plank, and joined them. Rosie met her eyes. Said nothing. But a smile passed between them that was older than blood. That night, when the house was still, Martha slipped back into the left room. She pulled out the crate and removed one dress. It smelled of cedar and thyme. She carried it to the porch where Rosie sat mending a sleeve by lantern light. "Cricket's the smallest," Martha said. Rosie nodded. "I never finished this one," Martha said, holding the dress up. "Maybe you can." Rosie took it with careful hands. "Maybe it's time someone did." The wind rose again. And just beyond the reach of the light, a man stood by the far tree line, watching. Waiting. The first crack of hooves against dry earth came at midday, just as Martha was hanging a line of damp linens and Rosie was mending a tear in Jonah's only good shirt. The sound was sharp, deliberate, no aimless wanderer this time, no drifter whistling against the wind. This was a purpose-driven gallop. The kind that never came for coffee. Rosie's head snapped up. "Stay close," she murmured, voice calm, but her hands stilled on the thread. The boys were already near the porch, silent and alert, like wolves that remembered the shape of a snare. Judah stepped from the barn, his long frame casting a shadow that reached the steps before he did. He didn't say a word, only looked toward the horizon, where the dust plume rolled like thunderclouds in disguise. 3 riders came into view, dust coats stiff with grit, rifles slung too casually across their backs. The one in the middle, taller, crueler in posture, wore a battered bowler hat and a face that suggested every kindness had been used up long ago. They didn't dismount. They didn't nod. They stopped 10 yards out, boots still in stirrups, like judges in a court that never offered appeals. "You got a woman here by the name of Rosemary?" the man in the bowler called out. Judah didn't blink. "Depends on who's asking. I go by Sheriff Callan. These 2 here ride with me. We're not here to cause trouble." He paused, spat to the side. "Just here for what's owed." Rosie stepped forward, one hand on Elijah's shoulder. "I'm Rosie," she said. The sheriff looked at her like she was a ledger, and he didn't like the math. "You're a hard woman to trace. But lucky me, trouble leaves footprints." Martha came out then, wiping her hands on her apron, standing between Rosie and the line of riders. The wind tugged at her hem like a warning. "What do you want?" she asked, voice quiet. "Not what. Who?" Callan replied. "Those boys don't all belong to her. One of them was promised to a man in Arkansas. 2 others were registered to an orphanage she ran from without signing papers. That's kidnapping by law." "They're not cargo," Martha said. "Law don't see gray," he snapped. "Only signatures and seals. And she don't got either." Judah's voice cut in then, low and sharp. "So you came all this way to drag children behind your saddle?" Callan's jaw twitched. "I came to restore order." Elijah stepped forward, jaw set. "We don't belong to anyone but her." "That's so?" the sheriff said, almost amused. "You think affection's proof of parentage?" Cricket, who had been clutching Rosie's skirt, let go and walked straight up to Judah. Small, barefoot, wild curls around his face. He took Judah's hand. She said stay, the boy whispered. Judah tightened his grip. Callan exhaled through his nose. "We're leaving with the boys. You can make that hard or you can make it quiet." Rosie stepped down from the porch, voice trembling but steady. "You'll take me before you take them." "That's already written," the sheriff said. "But the boys. They're mine," she snapped. "Not by blood. By choice." He leaned in the saddle. "Choice don't hold up in court." "I've been courtside plenty," she said. "Most courts don't feed children who scream in the night. Most don't sit beside them when they wet themselves from dreams they can't explain. Most don't hold them when they don't even remember how to ask for help." She paused. "I did all that." So tell me, what makes a mother? Callan didn't respond. His horse pawed the dust. Judah moved then, slow and certain. There ain't a man in this town who'd let you take 6 boys screaming from a ranch woman and a widow's porch. I ain't seen no widow, Callan said. You're looking at her, Martha said, stepping closer. Rosie died when she ran. What came back, she's something else. And this house is full because of her. A silence fell that felt heavy as stormlight. The second rider, younger, shifted in his saddle. Sheriff, maybe we let it be. Callan turned sharply. We got a job. Yeah, the third man muttered, but maybe this ain't the place for it. The sheriff studied the yard. 6 boys staring him down. 2 women standing as if the dust couldn't touch them. A man who looked ready to bury something, and not a single witness who would testify different. Callan spit again. Ain't the end of this. Then he turned his horse. They rode off, the wind covering their retreat with a cloud of dust that stuck to the tongue. Only when they disappeared over the ridge did Rosie sit down. Not fall. Not cry. She just folded her legs and lowered herself to the earth like she didn't trust it to hold her. The boys ran to her, arms circling, wordless. Inside, Martha poured whiskey and handed it to Judah. You think he'll be back? He nodded once. That night, Rosie stayed in the parlor, sewing the dress Martha had given her. Her fingers moved in tight stitches, small and precise, as if she could bind the whole world together with enough thread. Martha sat across from her, thumbing a Bible she hadn't opened in years. You think they'll take them? They'll try. You'll leave if it keeps them safe? Rosie didn't look up. They don't need a fugitive. They need a future. Martha rose and crossed the room. Then stay. Let me fight for you. Rosie finally met her eyes. I was ashamed you couldn't talk about for 10 years. Why now? Because I've learned, Martha said, voice thick, that family isn't who makes you, it's who claims you when everyone else turns away. Judah entered quietly. You'll need papers. Rosie blinked. What kind? The kind that says they belong here. We'll talk to Doc Abner. Tilly knows the judge up in Clay County. We'll make it legal. Rosie exhaled, trembling. And you? She asked Martha. You still want quiet? An empty house. Martha smiled softly. This house was never meant for quiet. Outside, the boys played barefoot in the moonlight. Cricket found a feather and stuck it behind his ear. Elijah was teaching Jonah how to tie knots strong enough to pull a calf. The porch creaked under their laughter. Later, after the house had gone still and the fire burned low, Rosie opened the dresser drawer and took out a yellowed envelope. She unfolded the paper slowly as if it might tear from memory alone. It was a letter, never sent. Addressed to Martha Bramble. Written the night she gave birth in a shack beside the Pecos, when her daughter slipped away before the second breath. I'm sorry I ran. I didn't know where else to go. I hope one day you'll understand. Her name was Lily. I held her as long as I could. I buried her under a cottonwood tree. I sang her mama's song. She looked like you. Rosie placed the letter in the fire. Watched it curl and blacken until the ashes were light enough to lift. Then came the sound again. But this time only one. Closer. Slower. And a shadow at the gate. Holding something in his hand, the stranger at the gate did not move. He held something wrapped in brown cloth, weathered and damp from the dew, and stood as still as the fence post beside him, only the flick of his coat betraying the wind that stirred beneath the stars. Judah stepped off the porch first, rifle low in his hand but not raised. He knew a threat when he saw one. And he knew restraint when it stood like that, cold, deliberate, and worn thin at the edges. Evening, Judah called. The man nodded once. You Bramble? Judah's jaw flexed. That depends. I ain't here to cause trouble, the man said, lifting the wrapped bundle. I'm here to deliver this. Been carrying it 3 days. Paid to make sure it got here clean. He walked forward slowly, offering the package. Judah took it, unwrapped a corner, and squinted under the lantern light. Inside was a thick envelope tied in red twine, stamped with an official wax seal. Underneath it, folded between worn paper and torn parchment, was a smaller square of fabric, blue gingham, faded with time. Rosie stepped beside Judah, eyes fixed on the bundle. The man gave her a long look, then tipped his hat. Name's Colin. I knew a woman once who looked just like you. She said if I ever crossed Texas again and heard the name Bramble, I ought to stop and deliver this. He looked like he wanted to say more but didn't. She had fire in her, he added. But she didn't burn. Then he turned, mounted his horse, and rode off into the dark without looking back. Rosie's hands trembled as she untied the string. The seal cracked. The pages unfolded like wings. They were affidavits, notarized documents, half legal, half legible, but real. Custody claims, statements of guardianship, 3 with her name in bold. Others bore signatures from outposts she hadn't seen in years. One had a crude drawing of Elijah beside the line mother, Rosie M., known as Ma. Martha read over her shoulder, stunned. "They're real," she whispered. "They're what the sheriff said I needed," Rosie replied. "How did she?" Rosie didn't finish the question. Somewhere between the lines, someone she'd once helped had tried to return the favor. Inside, the boys were asleep in piles, arms flung over each other like littermates. They hadn't stirred once through the quiet exchange. But Rosie didn't go to bed. She stayed on the porch until the moon had gone, until Judah leaned his rifle against the rail and said quietly, "You ready to finish this?" At sunrise, Rosie tied back her hair, dressed in her only dark skirt, and buttoned it all the way up. Martha brushed out Cricket's curls. Judah hitched the wagon. They left the boys behind with Tilly Ash and a promise that they'd return before dusk. The ride into town was silent. Not fearful, just tight with the tension of something about to be undone or remade. Word had spread before they even reached the church steps. The mayor was already outside, face pinched with disapproval. Doc Abner stood by the courthouse door, hat in hand, lips pursed as if he'd been waiting years to say something worth hearing. Rosie stepped down from the wagon, clutching the envelope. "You here to protest?" the mayor asked, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "No," she said. "I'm here to register my sons." The crowd murmured. The sheriff, now red-faced from drink or defeat, stepped onto the steps, one hand on his belt. "You again?" he growled. "Didn't I tell you this wasn't over?" "You did," Judah said, stepping beside her. "And we listened." Rosie handed over the documents. Callan looked them over, eyes scanning lines he likely couldn't read clearly. He passed them to the clerk. She adjusted her spectacles and frowned. "These are dated. Some of these children aren't even from the same district." "They're not from the same mother?" someone hissed from the back. "No," Rosie said, turning toward the voice. "They're not. Some of them were abandoned in wagons. One was pulled from a riverbank. One followed me through 3 towns before he spoke. They're not from the same mother, but they all found me. And I stayed." Callan smirked. "You think devotion makes you their kin?" "I think devotion is the only thing that ever did." A silence followed. Doc Abner stepped forward then, his cane tapping against the wood. "I've treated those boys. Seen them bruised, sick, fevered. They trust her with their pain. That's more than most blood ever earned." Callan scoffed but didn't argue. Martha took one step closer to the sheriff. "You'll have to say it in front of all these folks if you're going to take them. That she doesn't deserve them. That they're better off in some house with locks and rules, without the only mother who ever cared if they woke up hungry." Callan hesitated. Then Rosie did something she hadn't done in years. She knelt. Right there, on the courthouse steps, she dropped to her knees and unfolded the blue gingham cloth. Inside it was a pressed wildflower, brittle but intact. She held it up. "She was mine," she whispered. "The first Lily. She didn't survive winter. I carried her too far too long. Buried her under a cottonwood tree I still see when I sleep. I've been trying to earn her ever since." The town was quiet. Even the birds stopped. "Let me keep the ones I saved." Tilly stepped forward, eyes wet. "You already did." The clerk looked at Callan. "You want to fight the papers, take it to Clay County. But you won't win. You'd be fighting half the town and the only woman here willing to take 6 mouths and call them her own." Callan ground his teeth. "You'll regret this." Judah stepped forward. "Not as much as you will if you come back." Callan turned. Walked away. No word. No fight. The crowd slowly dispersed. Some nodded. Some didn't. But no one spoke against her. When they returned to the ranch, the boys were waiting at the gate, barefoot and beaming. Elijah ran first, the others right behind. Rosie climbed down from the wagon with the envelope pressed to her chest. "They can't take you now?" Jonah asked. "No, baby," she said. "They can't take us." That night, they roasted sweet potatoes over a fire. Judah brought out an old fiddle and played something rough but steady. Cricket fell asleep with his head in Martha's lap. Elijah leaned against the porch rail, watching Rosie with a gaze that had finally let go of fear. After the fire burned down, Martha showed Rosie a spare key. "I had it made last week," she said. "The left room is yours now. You can take it. Or not. But it's yours." Rosie held the key like it weighed more than iron. Later, when the house had settled and the moonlight carved shapes through the curtains, Rosie stood at the threshold of the left room. She walked in slowly, barefoot, tracing her fingers over the quilt. She sat on the edge of the bed. From beneath her sleeve, she pulled the pressed flower and tucked it into the frame of the mirror. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the voices of boys laughing in their sleep and the soft creak of a porch where someone was finally home. And across the prairie, under the same stars, a cottonwood tree stood silent, its roots deep, its branches outstretched, and its memory safe.